Joining us right now to talk more about the election is Ed Rollins. He is Republican strategist and co-chairman of the Great America PAC, backing Donald Trump. Ed, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning. My pleasure.
I want to ask you about the media, whether or not Donald Trump is fighting this uphill battle there. But I also want to get your take on these new polls this morning. First, on the media, do you with his claims about being rigged?
Well, rigged is a strange word to use. The media has always had a bias towards Democrats as long as I've been in the game, which is a long period of time. So you sort of live by the sword, you die by the sword. I mean, he had great advantages in the primary, and obviously the media has turned on him, with the exception of Fox and a few others. That's why you have other alternatives in a campaign. You have your own ability to go out and communicate through paid media and what have you, which he chose not to do as much as others have.
What do you guys think about this? Because, I mean, you know, does it matter that ABC, CBS, NBC, Washington Post, New York Times is all, you know, pushing Hillary and may not be covering this, may not be covering Trump fairly, given that there's a new world today? You've got online, social media, Drudge, Breitbart. What do you think?
I still think it matters, but he needs to stop complaining about it. So what? Yeah, of course the media is biased against Donald Trump, but it doesn't get him anywhere. I mean, maybe it reinforces his supporters and their support of him, but I really don't see what it gets him in terms of independent voters and Democrats.
Ed, what do you think about that? I mean, at the same time, the average guy and gal out there may not know. They may not really be aware.
Well, I think less and less people read newspapers or follow things on mainstream television, but at the same time, there's certainly been a drumbeat out there, and there certainly has been no love lost. I think the critical thing here, and obviously we're going to get into the polls, we have to quit worrying about national polls. They don't mean a darn thing at this point in time.
That was my next question, Ed. Because
I'm answering it for you.
Before you poo-poo the polls, Ed.
Yes.
Can I just ask you about this discrepancy?
Came in with a garden hose and just all over it.
This is important. I mean, really. NBC News and Wall Street Journal put out their new poll yesterday. It has Clinton ahead by 11%, Ed Rollins. That is a pretty big lead, but it's a completely different story in another poll. And it's taken during the exact same period. This is the new ABC News Washington Post poll. It has the two candidates in a statistical dead heat. Clinton is up 4 points over Trump.
In fairness, 4 points is the margin that Obama had over Romney last time. And when you're dealing, the Fox poll is probably the most accurate poll, which was 7.
And this is the most recent. This was right in the middle of the two. Here's the Fox News poll, Ed. 45 to 38.
Right.
Here it is. So what do you think?
Well, I think that's the most accurate poll, and I think what you do, I've always had my own biases on polls. It's very, very important for a person who's running a campaign. It's like instruments in an airplane. You've got to have them, but at the same time, you have to understand that there's lots of different ways of looking at them. The problem with the NBC poll is that if you basically believe that Trump is only trailing women by 8%, when every other Republican historically has done way more than that, considering his last couple months, I think you have to sort of throw that poll out. My premise has always been if the poll matches my gut, I believe the poll. If the poll doesn't match my gut, I go do another poll. And we certainly have enough polls today. I think the race is a 7 or 8 point race, but the point I come back to, national polls don't matter today. It's state by state poll. We run electoral college elections, and clearly Trump is behind in the electoral colleges today, and that's what's going to matter at the end of the day.
So what's his path at this point? I mean, he looks like he's pulling out of Virginia. At least that's what we heard over the weekend.
He has one path, and that's Wednesday night. He has to basically make people look at him in a different way and think he's presidential. If he's going to go out and call Hillary a liar and do all the rest of it and beat her up, the probability is that he'll freeze it where it is today. We've had 56 elections in this country since the beginning in 1789. We've never missed an election. We've had presidents assassinated. We've had wars. We've had revolutionary wars. And it's very, very important that we preserve the democracy that we have. It's a beacon to the rest of the world. So by Rudy Giuliani and others talking about elections being rigged, I've been around American politics for half a century. There are very, very few cases of where there's ever voter fraud, and it's very small in certain cities. No presidential race has been lost by voter fraud.
Really?
And if two people basically had an ability to have an objection, it was Richard Nixon in 1960 and Al Gore when he lost, and they haven't. They step aside, but you can't go back in history. I teach a course on American presidency. You can't go back ever and show me any election where someone said it was won by fraud.
But
And I raised this earlier, Ed, but by using the word rigged, even if they say that they're talking about the media, Trump's still tweeting that he is talking about what's going on at the polls as well. Does that discourage people from even going out and voting for him?
I don't think so. I think, if anything, what's going to happen in both cases, and what the Washington Post poll may very well do, is energize Democrat voters who, if they thought they were going to win by a bigger margin, weren't going to turn out. So, I'm not into conspiracy theories, but certainly any Democrats can take that poll and argue you got to get out, you got to work harder than you ever worked before because it's close.
You had mentioned on Wednesday at the debate he sort of needs to pivot, but won't that disenfranchise his base if they don't see him?
His base is not going away. I mean, to all the bombardment that's taken place, they are still there and they're solid, and he's reinforced it, and you see in all of these polls, there's no evolving away from him by his base. Equally as important, she has a base that's not going away either.
But they need new people, right? So, I mean, go through some of the states. Florida's obviously critical. I was happy to see Frank Luntz in the building earlier, and he said, look, Florida, he's got to win Florida at this point.
Well, if he doesn't win Florida, there's no game. He has to win Florida and Ohio. He has to win everything that Romney won last time, and Florida and Ohio and a couple of others to be in the game. Pennsylvania started to slip away today. Virginia, as you said earlier. North Carolina, which has been ours last time, which should be a Republican state, is very, very critical. And then some of the smaller states. But if you don't win Florida, you're not in the game. So all-out efforts have to be in Florida, the state we can win. All efforts have to be in Ohio, which is still a state we can win.
Do you really think Pennsylvania's off the table at this point? I mean, when you go to the Pennsylvania T, it's like Alabama, right? I mean, and they're rabid supporters of Trump. And if turnout isn't what we think it's going to be in Philly amongst African-American supporters, maybe he still can pull it off.
We don't know that. And I think at the end of the day, what difference does it make if African Americans turned out at 13%. They're 11% of the population. They turned out 13% of the electorate in the last two elections for Obama. So they go back to 11%. They're still a very significant vote, and they're not going to vote for Trump. At the end of the day, Trump has to get his base out. To your point, in Pennsylvania, you can travel all around Pennsylvania, all the rural areas of Ohio, Pennsylvania, what have you. You see nothing but Trump signs. You'd think there was no other campaign.
Then there's the money end of it. Trump drawing some pretty big name donors, but he's still lagging behind Clinton in fundraising. Peter Thiel, PayPal co-founder, he did a good job at the Republican National Convention for him. He's investing $1.25 million in the Trump campaign. Clinton raised $154 million in September. Trump raised $100 million in September. Does this put him at a disadvantage heading into the final days? And what's your thought about Peter Thiel giving him $1.25 million?
I'm very pleased that Peter put money in, and others have put money in. There's other millionaires that have put money into the race.
$24 million from 5
But at the end of the day, she has at least a 2-to-1 advantage going in the close of this race. She has bought a lot of airtime already, and unfortunately, he's going to be badly outbought in the closing days. She will have advantages on organization. She'll have advantages on television. She'll have advantages on all the absentee ballot and what have you. He still has a dynamic opportunity here to basically break this race up, but he has to do it Wednesday night. Otherwise, you're not going to be in it.
I don't know. Everything you're saying, I mean, all of these advantages that she's had, it's so extraordinary to me that it's still 50-50.
Well, it's not quite 50-50, but they're not eating the dog food. That's the bottom line. They still view her as not honest. They still don't want her. A lot of people don't. That doesn't mean she can't win the presidency. And I think at this point in time, she certainly has to be favored to win the presidency, unless he can basically convince the 60 or 70 million people who watch on Wednesday night that basically he can be president, and there's a different demeanor, and there's a different vision for the country, which is really what he has to make that effort.
Wow, such a big event as far as where we are this Wednesday night debate. Ed, thank you.
My pleasure.
Amazing insights as always. Ed Rollins there, and Fox Business Network will take you live to that third presidential debate. It is critical in this election. It's moderated by Fox News' Chris Wallace. Our special primetime coverage will kick off at 6 p.m. on Wednesday night, right before the debate, and then Mornings with Maria will be live for pre and post analysis from the debate. That's Wednesday and Thursday from Las Vegas. Join us live. Coming up next, a siege on one of the largest ISIS strongholds in Iraq. The new push to drive the Islamic State out of Mosul, the second largest city in Iraq. Then fall is here, but it doesn't feel like it. Near record heat hits half the nation.